Welcome to the Good Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Charles Good. And today we're exploring a bold, game-changing idea that flips traditional leadership on its head. If you've ever wondered why some teams achieve extraordinary results while others, despite having smart people and solid plans, stall out, you're in the right place. Our guest believes the answer isn't finding a single visionary leader. It's about something far more powerful, teamship. A culture where leadership is shared, trust runs deep, and every member elevates the others. And no one knows more about building this kind of culture than Keith Ferrazzi. He's a world-renowned thought leader on collaboration and the future of work. He's also a #1 New York Times bestselling author of the classics Never Eat Alone and Who's Got Your Back, and the founder and chairman of Ferrazzi Greenlight, a research and consulting firm that has advised some of the biggest names in business, from Fortune 500 companies to cutting-edge startups. Keith has spent decades studying the top 15% of high-performing organizations across many industries, distilling what makes them thrive when others struggle. His latest book, Never Lead Alone, 10 Shifts from Leadership to Teamship, captures the essence of that research and challenges everything we thought we knew about leadership. Today, we'll unpack the 10 pivotal shifts that transform good teams into great ones, explore how psychological safety and shared accountability unlock next-level performance, and give you practical strategies you can start applying immediately to revolutionize how your team works. Welcome to the Good Leadership Podcast, where we explore the stories, strategies, and insights of thought leaders who inspire us to think differently and lead better. Through candid conversations and expert perspectives, we dive into the challenges, breakthroughs, and practical lessons that shape exceptional leadership. So let's start with that first question, Keith, the foundational concept. You argue that there needs to be a fundamental shift from leadership to teamship, and this challenges decades of leadership thinking. So what has led you to this revelation, and why is traditional leadership failing teams today?
Most teams are mediocre. We have a diagnostic tool that we use when we go in to start working with a team. And we ask questions like, can we actually challenge each other when it's risky to do so? On a scale of 0 to 5, the average team is in the high ones. We ask the team, does the team have my back? And that's in the mid 2s on the scale of 0 to 5. Not great. So most teams are fairly mediocre, number one. Number two, there is a fundamental belief that most teams are hub and spoke to the leader. The leader is standing like a maypole and everyone's dancing around them. The relationship is with the leader, not necessarily to each other. And we believe that it's one thing for the leader to give feedback, but it's another thing for the team to give each other feedback, for the team to hold each other accountable, for the team to lift up each other's energy. So what we did was we identified over 25 years of research of high-performing teams. We identified what were the shifts that a mediocre team made versus a high-performing team. And what we found was there's 10 shifts. Many of them are more important than others, like the shift from being conflict avoidant to candid. And then we delineated the practices of these high-performing teams in very simple laid out formats. So the book is organized around 10 shifts that a team needs to make and very simple practices that the team and the leader can adopt. So that's been it's been really a work of 25 years, as you mentioned, decades of research of high-performing teams.
Well, that shift from individual heroics to collective performance is fascinating, and it connects to something you call co-elevation.
Yeah.
And like you said, you talk about moving from the hub and spoke leadership to co-elevation, and you kind of unpack that a little bit, but how can teams renegotiate their social contracts to really embrace this approach? Because it's a major shift in some cases.
It is. And you used a very intriguing word that I bring up called social contracts. I believe that the culture of a team is a social contract. So you have one social contract that mediocre teams have, which is if we challenge each other in the open, that's throwing each other under the bus. There's a different social contract, which is I'm going to challenge you because I would never let you fail. Right? That's a renegotiation of the social contract. The book walks you through the conversation to have with your team, but then it only matters if you then follow it with practices. So I'm sure you're going to get into this, but one of the great practices that we like to use is a thing called stress testing. So a stress test is when instead of a standard report out, I would come into a room and give my report out of some initiative. I would invite people to stress test my initiative. I give the report that says, here's what I've achieved, here's where I'm struggling, here's where I'm going. And then the team in small breakout conversations would say, here's what you might still be missing. Here's an idea for you, and here's where I'd be willing to help. By assigning a stress test, you've just assigned a culture that I can tell you is high performance. You've assigned the challenge culture. You've assigned the supportive culture. You've assigned the curious culture. And that's the key. Don't expect that your team will organically evolve into high performance. Assign it in simple practices.
This collaborative approach clearly drives results, but it requires a level of openness that many teams struggle with. And I've seen this time and time again from talking to so many leaders is that, from conflict avoidance to candor, which is really difficult. Most teams struggle with this, either avoid it or they handle them very poorly. What are some practical steps for building a culture where really candor and constructive challenge become strengths rather than these sources of conflict or tension?
Sure. As one I just mentioned is stress testing. It's probably one of the more prominent ones. Another one is something called a candor break. Like you're having a heated discussion in the room and you're not sure if you got everything out on the table. So the next step is to say to the room, okay, let's pause for a second. Everybody write on a piece of paper from 0 to 5. How candid is this dialogue been? And you'll get numbers like 2 and whatever. And you're like, okay, we still haven't put it all out on the table. Go into breakouts of 2. Just turn to each other. And I want you to discuss what's not being said that should be said in the room. And then everybody goes around and shares what they feel is not being said that should be said. And what you'll find is that by turning this into a practice, a simple assignment called a candor break, it's game changing for the candor of the team. All you got to do, the culture that you want to have, just turn the culture you want to have into a set of assignments and practices.
And something you mentioned in the book that I think really bears mentioning is that the power of 3, right? It's compelling. Engagement in small breakout rooms is 85% higher than when teams meet as a single cohort in the main room. So those smaller groups, individuals, will self-critique better and weed out those weak ideas more effectively.
Yeah, look, in a room of 12 people, 4 people will think they're heard. When you use breakout conversations, we get to the stage where 10 people out of 12 think that they're heard.
And I love what you talk about in terms of Yoda moments, giving the Yodas explicit permission to raise their hand and call out a Yoda moment and say these hard things, or act as a referee between competing perspectives and have that psychological safety at the same time.
Similar to a candor break and a stress test, Yoda is an invitation for a team that if you feel something needs to be said that's not being said, raise your hand and say Yoda moment. And Yoda is that all-wise, all-knowing character, which I believe every team has the wisdom of Yoda within it, but not in any one of us. It only happens if we all can share our truth in the room. Yoda moment, like how many of us has ever been in a room where a large number of people are waiting for 2 people to have finished their dialogue. They've gone into some side conversation. It's taking forever. That's an opportunity for anybody to say, Yoda moment, couldn't this be a side conversation happening outside of the room? Those are the kind of, I want to give agency for the team to take care of each other.
Well, and the key insight too, I think, is candor is about not being harsh. It's about creating a structured, safe way, right, for important truths to surface so that the team can address them more productively in the
Indeed.
end, which many teams struggle with.
Totally. And that's the key. I mean, we're trying to give simple rules of engagement among a team that will ultimately become normalized. But in the early stage, you really do have to call them out.
And that foundation of candor clearly enables stronger team dynamics, which connects to your insights about building deeper relationships. And you
Yeah.
argue that high performing teams need both bonding and challenging. They need to trust each other deeply while also pushing each other to higher standards. But how do you build this dichotomy, this contradictory combination? And what does it look like when they get it right?
Yeah. So what we have to do is make sure that the relationships are as purposeful as any other aspect of a team success. The model that we use, by the way, has 3 layers. The bottom layer is the relational layer. And we have 3 chapters which define that. One is, how do you bond purposefully? How do you commit to having each other's back and keeping each other's energy strong? We call that the resilience chapter. And how do we celebrate each other and keep fuel in the tank? Those three chapters are the foundation of the relationships that make a team strong. On top of that, we have a layer of the work that we call the challenge layer. This is where the candor we've just been talking about, the shift from conflict avoidance to candor. Also where we're committed to being each other's coaches, right? That kind of stress testing and open dialogue that gives each other the feedback that we need. And then the top layer is what we call 21st century collaboration. How do we collaborate, not in old school meetings, but how do we collaborate more effectively? That bottom relationship layer is as important as the candor layer. You got to build the psychological safety. You've got to go around. We do a monthly energy check. Everybody shares, what is it that is draining your energy these days? And when you hear that as a team, you can commit to keeping each other's energy strong. And you can learn that someone's mother is struggling in assisted living, or someone's kid is struggling in school, or someone's struggling on a project they're working on. But then you can have each other's back. Now, if you don't have that in a virtual and hybrid world, then your relationship strength will erode.
And most teams you mentioned, which I agree with, are built on serendipity rather than on purpose. So you have to find these practices to create this genuine connection. You give two in the book: sweet and sour check-ins, which I think is a nice strategy to employ, and even a personal professional check-in, which once again seems like common sense, but not enough managers and leaders do this consistently.
Yeah, and another one was called an energy check. They're all triangulations on the same idea, which is once a month, make sure that the team is checking in and understanding what's going on in our lives. And if you do that and you have a social contract that said we care about each other, we have each other's back, we want to lift each other up, then that information will not only be on the leader to take care of everybody, but the team can take care of each other.
And this personal connection really clearly strengthens team performance, and it relates to your insights about building collective resilience. You advocate for peer-to-peer accountability rather than traditional top-down accountability, which is a big shift for most organizations. How does the horizontal accountability look like in practice, and what results have you seen from teams that have mastered this approach?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm not saying that you eliminate top-down accountability. I'm saying you buttress it, you fortify it with peer-to-peer accountability. So I'm working with one company right now, a large consumer packaged goods company, and they're struggling with the operations keeping up with the demand of the market. And that means that's a sales forecasting issue, it's a supply chain issue, it's a manufacturing operations issue, all of those. And yet, right now, all three of those are optimizing for their own goals. We had the three of them come together and say, it's so important that you have a shared sense of ownership and that you start to coach each other, start to point out each other's challenges that each of you see at the adjacency. So, the supply chain person is going to see flaws in sales forecasting, right? That maybe sales forecasting doesn't see for themselves. So once you do that, you can start to use stress testing as a tool where people are constantly giving each other feedback. And there's other tools that we talk about in the book where that peer-to-peer accountability, we have this thing called an open 360, where people are giving each other actual feedback on performance, on style, on ideas, etc., in an open format as opposed to top down from only the boss.
And that's an important distinction. You're right. You don't want to eliminate the other form. And we've seen this in our organization as well, having that reframe where instead of the manager tracking progress and intervening when things go off track, team members actively support each other to stay on track. Or instead of the consequences coming from above, right? The consequences come from letting people down that you work with every day. So such a powerful reframe. It just takes time to make that shift and get that mindset changed as a result. And we've seen that peer support really strengthens a team performance, and it relates to insights that you give about the resilience piece. Because in turbulent times like we're in right now, many would argue, many leaders default to crisis management mode. How can teams intentionally build resilience practices that help them thrive rather than just surviving during these difficult times?
Well, again, it all starts with the recontracting from the beginning. Does the team want to be? If you ask a team, have you ever been a part of a team that had each other's back, where it was constantly giving each other energy, where you felt you were able to achieve something as a team you couldn't achieve individually? Many times, at least 50% of the audience will say that they've been on one of those teams. but they're not on it today necessarily. And remembering what it's like to be a part of an esprit de corps like that, a callback. Now the question is, can we breed enough hope and possibility that we can have that here today? Once we decide we want to have it, the question is, can we start implementing the practices that we teach in the book that show that it's possible?
And like you mentioned before in our conversation, just the energy, right? Having these energy check-ins to make sure that you're assessing the energy in the room. Because in today's society, I think that's even more critical than ever, is making sure that members step forward to provide that support and resources. Don't rely on the leader, and don't rely on that crisis management approach either.
Yeah, I totally agree. Totally agree. And I think you've done a beautiful job of navigating the book with your questions. Again, it's those three layers. The last layer I might add is just this idea where we use old form collaboration, like meetings, as the primary form of our collaboration, where today, and this is chapter 6 of the book, we have so many new tools, so much new software, and we're not using it. We should be leaning in and collaborating even before we have meetings, so that when we show up in the meetings, we can land the plane quickly.
Well, which really leads to that collaboration and innovation in using these tools. You emphasize shared feedback and rapid learning is an essential for any agile team. Most teams struggle with giving feedback effectively. I've seen this time and time again. It's just always present. It's giving feedback, it's receiving feedback. They're not good at either one of those. Leaders aren't. What frameworks have you developed to really promote real-time feedback and openness in the experimentation among team members?
Well, I think we've already mentioned both of them. You mentioned one just now, Agile. Think of any project you're working on, break it down into monthly Agile sprints, weekly Agile sprints, and at the end of every Agile sprint, have that success stress tested by the team. Use the stress testing framework in chapter 3, but in Agile sprints, which is one of the chapters of the book, how do you break the work down into Agile? And then at the end of that, use the stress testing framework to triangulate what success looks like and how we might need to pivot some of our activities going forward.
And I've seen that transformation happens when teams realize that there's a competitive advantage isn't in what they know today, but it's in how fast they can learn and improve for tomorrow. And that's really speaks to learning agility that clearly drives performance, which connects to your insights about these agile working methods.
100%. 100%.
So when we talk about the leveraging collaborative technology and AI, we talked about it in a previous episode, but you explore how technology, collaborative tools, AI can empower teams when used thoughtfully. I don't think there's enough adoption yet. There's a lot of fear around it. So people don't want to adopt any of this. They don't want to learn things that they need to know right now. And that fear is going to cause them to perhaps become obsolete or their skills. What are examples that you've seen of technology accelerating teamship? And maybe what are some guidelines to help teams avoid the trap of being disconnected?
Well, let me speak to that specific issue of fear. I understand that some of us may be afraid that our job will be lost. I can say that there will be jobs lost, no question. And that breeds a whole question about what is the social safety net that we're creating as a society to deal with that. But if jobs are going to be lost, the last ones to be lost will be of the people who are true innovators. If you're the innovator redefining your job for AI, the organization is going to need that applied in other areas of the business. If you're redefining workflows end to end, you might say to your boss, you know what, I figured out a way to use AI to take my role out 80%, right? I'd love to figure out other places where AI can be an equal tool. That boss would be like, go for it, right? There's an old joke that says, there's two hikers sitting on a log, and a bear comes out of the woods, and the one hiker starts running with his big old hiking boots. The other hiker takes off his hiking boots and puts on his tennis shoes, and the hiker screams back, "What are you doing? You can't outrun a bear." And the guy says, "I'm sorry, I don't have to outrun the bear. I just have to outrun you." If you're sitting here asking yourself, am I just going to be castrated and frozen because I'm afraid of losing my job? You will lose your job. If on the other hand, you want to be innovative, get out ahead and innovate and figure out ways that AI is going to accelerate transformation and change in the business, then you'll probably be the last one that needs to worry about re-engineering their rollout.
When I saw too, when Google bought YouTube in 2006, it was shocking to see $1 billion valuation created by so few people, right? And you mentioned something that I'd love for you to unpack. What is the reason that you've mentioned in the book of the hesitation to adopt generative AI versus software? Because software is easily and quickly adaptable and is adopted fairly quickly by people, but that's hasn't been the case with AI.
So AI is a relationship. Software is a tool. And you've got to step out of thinking of it as something you use and now into something you partner with. And I think that's just a whole new muscle. My simple advice is figure out how you and AI can do your job better than you've been able to do in the past. That's one. Next step is how can AI change the way you and your peers work together? And that looks at workflows, not just your role, right? And those two things probably stay focused there. The third one is really more focused on new business models. But if you stay focused on reengineering, not just your role, but the role end to end, it's all about the role end to end that ultimately matters.
And big, lofty promises have made tech intimidating today. The reality is probably closer to having many or thousands of multi skilled associates on hand ready to execute at speed and scale exactly what you need to do. In the final chapter of your book, you present Teamship as a social contract for future work. If a team wanted to start tomorrow, what specific steps would you recommend for building their new social contract for extraordinary performance?
Yeah. So the book was, first of all, the book's so short. I had 20 years to write this thing. It's so short because each shift has a simple couple of page story of a hero that does it well, some simple practices, and a diagnostic survey to see how you're doing. I would just use the book as it's intended. It's a roadmap. It's a roadmap, and really it's a workbook. Go chapter by chapter, read it together as a team, try the practices, use the diagnostic and see how it's changing your team's perception of its performance. And it's a lot of teams have been really transformed just using it as a simple workbook.
Well, this book follows the same formula that made Never Eat Alone so successful. It's chock full with simple practices that, if tried, could be game changing. And the magic happens, though, when teams commit to the practice and give them time to work, not just read it. You have to have some action behind it. Keith, this has been incredibly insightful. For listeners who want to start implementing these teamship principles tomorrow, what would you say is the single most important mindset shift or practice to begin with?
Expect more from the team, expect more from your peers, be willing to give each other feedback, and realize that not everything is hub and spoke to the leader, but the team needs to step up and meet leadership. And then the book provides you a beautiful, simple workbook and a roadmap to get there.
Remind our listeners, Keith, thank you so much for joining us, but remind them how they can get in contact with you and learn more about your work.
Thank you so much. I mean, LinkedIn is the best way to follow me and to get more information. And then if you want to go deeper with us and really learn these tools in an applied setting, we now have connectedsuccess.com. It's a program that we created called Beyond Connections that I think would be great for you.
Thank you again. And thank all of you listeners. Remember, as Keith has shown us today, the future of high performance isn't about heroic individual leadership. It's about creating teams that elevate each other to levels none of them could reach alone. So start with run, red flag rule, implement one teamship practice, and begin the journey from leadership to teamship. I hope this episode has provided you with valuable insights. If it has, I ask you to share it with someone who would also benefit from it. If you've been enjoying and gaining knowledge from this podcast, then subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can find all the previous episodes of the podcast and additional learning resources. You can also subscribe to the podcast on Apple or Spotify and leave up to a 5-star review.